Hi, my name is sroselle. I'm a Maya technical specialist, and I'm going to do a quick demonstration of some reflective modeling tools that you may not be aware of. And we'll start just by talking a little bit about symmetrical transforms. So in the last couple of releases, we've done a lot of work on creating reflective transforms or symmetrical transforms, which basically means if I have a character like this, where I have a low-res cage for a head, and I want to start making some edits. You can see there I edit one side of the character and it's independent of the other side. So we've added reflection tools for all of our translate, rotate, and scale, which basically would allow us to translate that transform across the character, or inverse rather. And one thing you need to know is when you're working with this, if there's any asymmetry in your character, you can actually compensate for that, even if it's really subtle, primarily if it's really subtle, by going in and adjusting this tolerance value. So in your transform options, you can turn on, or rather turn up, the tolerance value in order to find a match on a slightly asymmetrical character. So that's kind of handy. So now I can grab one side of the character and begin to edit it and have that pass over to the other side of the character. So this also works with soft selection. So if I just hit my B hotkey and start to scale that, I can go in and I can reflect my transform across the other side of the character if I'm creating an orc or something weird like that. So anyway, I want to point out that this is just a tools demo. It's not a modeling techniques demo, so please don't judge my techniques here. But anyway, let's move on and talk about the limitations of this. So these are all transform reflections. So this doesn't have anything to do with the topology of the object. So for instance, if I wanted to insert an edge loop, let's go in here and I'll just turn off soft select. And let's just go in and do an insert edge loop right here on the right side of my character. Now you can see that it'll highlight the left side, but as soon as I release and insert that, it only inserts it on the right side of the character. So if I repeat that again, I can start to add detail to the right side of my character, but that same detail does not get applied to the left. So again, these are topology based edits, so they're not actually being reflected. So we have a tool in bonus tools that kind of helps you with that. So I'm going to go to bonus tools, and under modeling, there's a tool called mirror instance mesh. Now this tool is primarily meant to work with characters. Your character does need to be at the origin for this to work. So depending on the orientation of your character, though, you can mirror in different directions. For instance, I can mirror vertically, so if I wanted to mirror top down. I can mirror front to back if I need to do that. Obviously that's not the most practical case. For this character, and most characters, you're going to be mirroring across the x-axis. So I'm going to choose positive x and do my mirror. And now you'll see I get two separate objects. I get my original object, and then I get a mirrored instance of that object. So these are linked together. So if I take one object and I position it or move it, then it's going to follow. If I were to rotate this, then it's also going to follow. And likewise, if I were to scale this, then it's also going to follow. So the transforms are mirrored, which is fine. But more importantly, the mesh is actually mirrored, so that if I were to go in and insert an edge loop on one side of my character, that edge loop is going to get inserted also on the other side of my character. So I can quickly start to go in here and add detail where needed and be ensured that that same detail is going to get added on both sides. So as another example, let's say I wanted to go in here for the mouth. I'm going to quickly switch over and turn off autocomplete, and I'll just go in here and quickly add some symmetry here for the lips. Hit insert. As soon as I do, that gets applied to the other side of the character, and now I can go in and I can continue to add my edge loops. Again, it'll highlight it first, which is just a nice visual cue, and then when I release or hit enter, it'll actually go in and insert the detail. So now you can see the beginnings of some lips there that were added. And again, these are separate objects. Now one other cool thing to point out about this is that there is an option for the transform reflect that works quite well with this. So right now I have my transform reflect on. So if I turn that off, because of the nature of the fact that this is a symmetrical object, it still reflects the transform. But if I were to go in here and grab a component, let's say on the forehead here, and pull that off to the side, what you can see there is that I've got a gap or a seam between my two objects. So there's a handy little option here. If I go into my transform options, when I turn on reflection, I also have this option called preserve seam. Preserve seam will work with a single whole object, but it also works with, in this case, with two mirrored objects. So if I turn on preserve seam, depending on my settings, right now actually the settings are high enough, there's also a threshold setting or a tolerance setting similar to the reflection tolerance. So you can always bump that up if it's not quite catching the seam. But it should be fine for what I have now. So now you can see, as hard as I try, I cannot pull that point off of the seam. If I turn off reflection once again, then I can pull it across, and if I need to have a hole there, I can. But most likely, in cases like this, you're going to want to preserve that seam for the character. So I can go in here and I can start to manipulate the shape of my lips without having to worry about breaking that seam between those 2 points. Now, one thing to point out is it also works with soft selection. So if I turn on soft selection, I can get these really interesting results where the seam, the interior seam, will stay intact, but if I pull out or push in, I can actually get a scaling effect with soft selection. And these work with rotate and translate as well, so you can get some pretty interesting results. Now, one thing to point out also is that right now I'm viewing a low-res version of this object. If I hit my 3 hotkey, then that will smooth this object. Now, all of my mirroring still works, so if I wanted to go in and start to edit this object one side to the other, the mirroring still works, as well as the the seam edits. Let's turn off my soft selection there. There we go. As well as the seam edits. There. Whoops. Oh, did I turn reflection on? Ah, this is a case where, because I've smoothed, I probably have offset that just slightly. So now I can go in and I can turn on, if I turn on my reflection, I can bump up my seam here. So this is a good example, actually. Kind of glad I ran into that, of where I might want to go in and bump up that tolerance. So the smoothing was enough just to make the tolerance out of range. So, or the offset out of the range of the tolerance. So bump that up, and now I've protected that seam again. So anyway, you'll notice that it works quite well with a smooth object as well. We will get little oddities like this wherever I have corners, because it's smoothing that corner, and therefore they're not actually joined or whatever, or bound, however you want to look at it. But ultimately, what I want to do is convert this into a single solid object. So I don't want to have 2 halves of my character forever. I basically want to maintain this as long as I need it, so that I can still go in and do things like inserting detail here. But at some point, I'm going to want to go in and actually combine this together so that I can start to add some asymmetry. So we've got a companion tool that works in conjunction with the mirror instance tool. And it basically allows you to combine these 2 back together. So I basically select both of these objects. I go into Bonus Tools under Modeling, and I have a tool called Merge and Combine. And it does exactly that. It merges it combines the 2 meshes together, and it merges that interior seam. So it'll automatically go in and stitch up that interior seam. If you want to see the before and after, one way to show this actually is to turn on the border edges. So you can clearly see that I've got a seam there on the border, and if I grab these 2 objects and go in and reapply my Merge and Combine, not only will it combine it into a single mesh, but it'll actually isolate that interior border and stitch it up wherever it finds a coincident vert, so that these edges are now merged and there's no opening there. So that pretty much wraps it up. I just wanted to introduce that because I think a lot of people don't know that some of the stuff in Bonus Tools is in there. So thanks for your time. Bye.